welcome back to the Money Bear podcast. Today I've got a special guest on. I've got Meg Wheeler, who is a CPA and founder of Meg K Wheeler. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've had a long day. What's been going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, we're just starting off tax season. So, it's going to be an even harder tax season this year, I think, well, I don't know if it's going to be that much harder, but it's going to be equally as hard as the last 2 years. Just lots of changes. And with the economy, everyone's nervous. So, just a lot going on in the tax world.
I am so honored that you would even have this podcast session with me at the beginning of tax season because I can only imagine as CPA, do you get to enjoy the holidays or do you kind of be, or you, oh, it's the holidays and January is going to be crazy and it's going to be crazy until April 15th.
Yeah, it's like the last reckoning. I get my 2 weeks and then I have to dive into it. No, I mean, one of the things that was really important to me when I started my business is I didn't want it to be like it was when I was in public accounting and tax season was crazy. Plus, everybody always thinks it ends April 15th and it doesn't. We have a lot of
hmm
clients who go on extension, or people on different tax year ends. It's a year round job. But you are right. The next few months are going to be a little bit, more chaotic than normal, but we're trying to put some things into place to balance it out. And, we value family and mental health in my business. So we try to prioritize both of those.
That's amazing. I love that because it's not every day that you hear about a firm focusing on managing folks' taxes, focusing also on mental health and like work-life balance and things along those lines. Like I think you're definitely an exception in your industry.
Yes, I am. But we have to. I mean, mental health it's a financial crisis. It's a
Right.
health crisis. So we've got to be focusing on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into our conversation, which today we're just going to be talking about more about your business, kind of your story and all that good stuff. But tell us who you are. So what is your business focus on? What are you doing? I know you've got a lot of stuff also going on outside of your business. So kind of give us the who is Meg Wheeler.
Yeah. So my business is Meg K Wheeler LLC. It's not an exciting name because when you're an accountant, you have to name your legal entity your name. It's a rule. So that's the business. megkwheeler.com is the website. If you go to megwheeler.com, you'll find my other identity, which is politics. I'm a political activist as well. So you can definitely go there, but we're not going to do your taxes over there. So I run, a tax, accounting, bookkeeping, and CFO services firm. Our community is really full of online and service based business owners, mostly marginalized business owners, folks who have been left out of the conversation, left out of access to capital, really left out of wealth building for way too long. And our whole purpose, yeah, we do your taxes, yeah, we do your books, we do all that stuff. But really, our purpose is to educate and empower you on the money stuff in your business with the goal of helping you create wealth and creating really long lasting, financially stable businesses so that we can achieve, economic equity in this world.
And you've got tons and tons of free tools available on your website as well. I remember when you came into the Lazy Investors community to talk about all your free stuff, I was like, wait, she has this for free? Which I love. It's amazing. You're really doing the work and making it all equitable.
Yeah, so as part of our commitment to economic equity, we are trying to be as accessible as possible. So for the most part, all of our educational tools are free. We have our Biz Money library, which anyone can get access to. Again, just go to our website and sign up. It's got a course I used to sell. It's in there, it's free. We just didn't want to we don't believe that financial education should be a barrier for folks to building wealth and to economic equity. It's all free. Obviously, you pay for our time, you pay for access to us, but we wanted to make sure that folks can at least get started. So if you're starting a business, if you're not sure about that kind of the beginning financial pieces, our Biz Money library is a great place to start.
I love it. So for you, I love how you're like, oh yeah, and I'm also in politics, like as a side. So which came first for you? Were you like, let me start my own business as a CPA, helping people with their taxes and working on this? Or was it, your political activism first? What came first, chicken or the egg?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always been really interested in politics. I've always cared a lot about elections and elected officials and policies, but I was never formally involved. And then I quit my job. I was in public accounting and then I worked for a company where I did their in house tax work. And I quit because it was too rigid. It wasn't accessible. It didn't work for I was a new mom at the time. It didn't work for that. I had my grandfather was aging and sundowning and it didn't work for me being able to visit him in an hour that made sense. And so I quit and I thought, well, I'm going to start my own business. And I did that. I actually didn't start a tax business. I started a physical products business, which if anyone has had a physical products business knows it's a nightmare because you have lots of inventory. So I abandoned that pretty quickly, but I realized that I loved the tax stuff. I loved the money stuff. I just didn't love it in the container I had been doing it in. And
Mhm.
I wanted to use my knowledge to really help other business owners. And I was particularly focused on women at the time, but to help other folks grow their own businesses. And it was kind of through that that I became more involved in politics because I started to pay attention to who was being left out of these business circles, who wasn't getting this capital that was so necessary to start businesses, and realized it's not just women that are being left out of this. It's people of color, it's the LGBTQ community, it's disabled folks, and so on. And really anyone who doesn't fit in that traditional mold. And that's when the politics really started to come into play for me. So it was 2019, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to run for office because this is ridiculous and I have a lot of good ideas. Somebody's got to change it. And so that running for office in what ended up being 2020 was really the game changer for me. And so now I'm very actively involved in politics and it's a big part of our business. We don't shy away from these conversations. We're always talking about money in the context of equity and policy and how money and wealth building is critical to achieving those goals.
No, I love that. They are so closely entwined, and I always rolling my eyes is probably like the nice way of saying it, but I always just go crazy when people comment. If I ever post something political on my page, they're like, this is a money page. This is not about politics. And it's like, you do realize we're in a capitalist society. Money is
Yeah.
intrinsically tied to literally every aspect of what we do. So I think it's so cool that you have both, that you're like, I'm focusing on helping people get more money and like managing it and doing those things, but I'm also advocating for you in my career as a politician. I mean, would you identify as a politician or more of a activist? Politician feels like such a dirty word.
You know,
Isn't that
it does.
crazy?
I hate that it is. And the thing I hate the most, well, I hate lots of things the most, but the thing I hate the most is when people say, oh, no politics or don't talk politics, or don't do politics. Everything is political. My ability to sit
Everything.
here and talk to you and own my own business is political because, by the way, women 50 years ago didn't own their own businesses. They didn't have credit cards. They couldn't open brokerage accounts. So my ability to literally have this conversation with you is political. And to act like we're not going to talk about it, it's too dicey. Come on, you're not going to talk about it because you're coming from a place of privilege where you don't need to talk about it because you are no
Right.
longer, or maybe never were, restricted in doing the things that you want or need to do in your life. But my life is political, your life is political, and we're still fighting for those rights. So, yeah, we're going to talk politics.
Yeah, 100%. So for you right now, what are you doing in your political life as well as what are you currently doing with the business? Like at first, actually, my question before that is, do you sleep? Like
Yeah.
you're also a
Really?
mom. I'm like, how do you do all of this? I hate that question of like, how do you do it all? But I'm like literally blown away by how much you're doing. I mean, the fact that you're an activist, politician, and you're also running your own business. And then we know that running your own business is not like a nine to
Mm,
five thing most of the time. It's more like, a 9 to 5, 7 days a week sort of thing. So how like
yeah.
what's your life like? How are you balancing these two things?
It is a balance, but it's about making choices. When I ran for office in 2020, and by the way, I announced before the global pandemic, about a month, and then we had this global pandemic. But when I did that, my business took a back seat, and it did take a
Mm-hmm.
hit in 2020 when I did that. And the last year or so, I've prioritized the business. I'm still very much
Mm-hmm.
involved in politics. I sit on the boards of several political organizations. I do a lot. I support campaigns, but I'm not running for office. I'm not out there every single day because you can't do it all. And so instead, and in fact, the email I sent out to our community this week in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was about how every single one of us needs to find our own acts of resistance. And they aren't necessarily running for office or working on a political campaign. They don't have to be that blatant, but they are building a successful business that support marginalized people or that,
Mm-hmm.
having a podcast where you're giving space to voices that are not, white men. Those are all
Mm-hmm.
acts of resistance. And so If you're struggling to figure out how to fit that into your life, you can do it in a lot of ways that are not that hard. Don't take up that much time. It's just about shifting your mindset around what counts as being an activist.
For you, what would you say some of those ways are? I know there's so many ways to show up for the things that you care about, whether that's with
Yeah.
your voice, whether that's through your physical presence, whether that's
Mhm.
through money. I mean, what are some of the things that you suggest for somebody who's like, I really do want to be involved and I do want to make a difference, but like, where the heck do I even begin? I feel so powerless.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, start paying attention at a very
Mhm.
basic level. Pay attention not just what's happening at the national level, but what's happening locally. One of the most important elections is your local election, whether it's school committee or town council or whatever your setup is, because those people are making everyday decisions that are having huge impact on not just your life, but the life of your community and folks in it. And so those are also really easy places to make a difference because usually there aren't that many people who are running for those positions, aren't that many people who are voting in those elections. My last town election, or at least the one a couple years ago, I think we had 11% turnout. 11% of the town was making decisions that were going to affect everybody. And by the way, that's not unusual. And in fact, I, speaking of, I do too much. I started a nonprofit called the Vote Local Project, and our sole goal is to get, I know, is to get
Well,
more
yeah, you're
people.
like, by the way, I also launched another business entirely, well, nonprofit. Holy crap.
To give you a
Anyway,
sense of
continue.
how my to give you a sense of how my mind works, I was actually getting a massage where I was supposed to be relaxing, and that during the massage, I was like, I'm going to start a nonprofit that gets people voting in local elections more. And I left, and I literally got in my car and like signed, like formed the entity on my phone.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you're incredible. That's amazing. But also, I'm like, it reminds me, I feel like entrepreneurs, we all function very similarly in those ways, and that we do have many ideas all at the same time. The hard part is sometimes picking which one to focus on and
Yeah,
like which one
yeah,
to really dedicate to. And I resonate with that so much. Even thinking about last night, I feel like the start of the year, I've got all these crazy goals and things that I'm like, okay, I'm putting so much pressure on myself where it's like, I go to lay down at night and I'm thinking of all of the things I have yet to do. And I have to constantly remind myself and that my yearly goals don't get accomplished in 2 weeks. But
no.
whoo, man, that's incredible. Again, do you like, how do you sleep? I really like, genuinely, how do you sleep? Do you fall asleep well?
I
Or are you
do.
a terrible sleeper? Really?
I do. I get 7 hours of sleep. I am a very active sleeper, so I think a lot,
Okay.
but I've started to do that thing where you keep that notebook next to your bed and you write down everything, and it kinda
To
helps.
do that. I need to do that. I always say I'm gonna do that because it's such a practical
Yeah,
thing to do of just like literally emptying your brain. But all right, I'm gonna start doing that, Meg.
you gotta try. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not that great at it yet, but it helps.
Okay, so you've discovered that in the local elections, only 11% of folks are coming out. And then you were like, you know what? I'm going to start a nonprofit to essentially address this issue. Can you tell us a little bit about that nonprofit?
Yeah, so we're starting really small because your kind of comment about we oftentimes will start all these things and they don't really go anywhere. We wanted to make sure that we build this slowly so that it lasts for a long time. So it's called the Vote Local Project. And we started it just in my hometown and one other town nearby. And the goal is to get more people to turn out in the local elections. And we do this really simply. We do it by informing people that there is a local election because most people don't actually realize there's a local election.
Right.
We've got yard signs, flyers, things like that. But one of the things we're working on maybe this year and next is actually a toolkit that anyone can take wherever you live to your local town clerk or political organization or whoever will listen and work with them to actually create the same exposure for your elections in your own town. We want this to be very much grassroots led. And, again, the idea is just to get people out there. So to answer, your question of, well, what do I do if I don't have a lot of time and it all feels really overwhelming? Start really small. Just start by voting. Start by paying attention to the issues. Sit on a local committee. A lot of times in these towns, you don't even have to get elected. They're appointed positions, and trust me, nobody is signing up for these. So you can mostly
Right.
walk in and do it. But it really is about paying attention and just remembering that everything going on between the big presidential elections is hugely impacting your life, even if it's just laying the groundwork for something that's going to happen. So I know it's really easy to shut off and think, oh, this doesn't matter for me, but it does. We're
Hmm.
thinking about money. This stuff hugely impacts whether it's, the recent stuff with the abortion laws or whether it's affordable housing or the climate. This is all going to affect our pockets. If you haven't already felt it yet, you will, I guarantee you.
And I love that advice because it is so when you look at the world and you look at all the issues, it is so easy to get so overwhelmed and think, I'm just one person. Nothing I do is going to impact anything, whether I vote or whatnot. But it's like in a local sense, that micro impact that you can have, which then, continues to
Yeah.
have that domino effect can be huge. And I love what you said too about like nobody's running for these positions, which is kind of sad, isn't it? I think about that with
Mhm.
politics in general on a macro level as well. Who's wanting to run for these positions? It's a very hard job and it's not exactly compensated well in some
Nope.
cases and you're not
Or at all.
appreciated. Right, exactly. So for you, when you were not only doing it at a micro level, but also running for
Mhm.
Senate, what were some of the things that surprised you when you had to really peel back the curtain and see behind the scenes on what it takes to run a campaign, but also like how things are functioning?
Our election system is, I would say, broken, except the problem is it was actually set up this way, which is designed to keep out anybody who is not wealthy. When I ran for state senate, I had, my husband works, so I had the luxury of having a second income, but we went into debt that year. We went into debt because I was not working in my business or wasn't working very much. And that was a really tough year for us financially because of that, because I couldn't afford to not have income coming in. I couldn't just take off months from my job like a lot of people who run could. Daycare, this is a huge conversation in the kind of election community. That daycare, I believe now on the federal level, it is finally an allowed campaign expense. It's not
Mm.
on the state level in a lot of places, and that's a huge issue. So if you are a parent who has a child, where do you put the kid when you have to go to a campaign event? And these campaign events are all day, all night. I mean, you are working 24/7 when you're running
Right.
for a bigger office. When I'm talking about these local things like school committee, it's not as that's much easier to jump into. But when you're running for state senate or state legislature, it's a much bigger deal. So it's not a surprise we don't see more marginalized folks in these roles because it's the barriers are so high.
I even remember when AOC was talking about it, how she's like,
Mhm.
I don't know how I'm going to afford rent. I don't know how
Yeah.
I'm going to pay the bills on the in between of when she was elected and when she began. And it's just like, that's so insane because exactly what
Yeah.
you said, it's only enabling people with wealth who
Yeah.
already have power essentially
Yes.
to go in and run for these positions. And it's wild when you just understand how the patriarchy works and how in
Yeah.
every how it impacts every
Yeah.
single level of our daily life.
Yes.
It's just wild. How do you, so for you, seeing behind the scenes, seeing how I think it's
Mhm.
easy to feel like, wow, this is really hopeless. Like there are so many
Yeah.
big, huge issues. How do you find the motivation to keep going? Is it just by doing that, like gives you the peace of like, I'm doing what I can? Or, tell me a little bit about what's going on in your brain.
A
It's
lot.
hard. It's so hard. Like I know we talked about the overwhelm of like the everyday person of being like, how do I even get involved? But like then
Yeah.
also the commitment of being somebody who's actively doing something about it when it feels like you're pushing this huge boulder up a mountain.
Yeah. I think about two things. Oftentimes, we'll reflect on the progress we've had. I'll think about the fact that 50 years ago, women couldn't have credit cards, and that blows my mind. I'll think about where we were with gay rights, where we were with women having the vote, and not and even women getting the vote took years and years for Black women to get the vote, and then so on.
Yep.
But I'll look at that and say, well, that progress was made. So I know progress is possible, but I also know it can take a long time. And that actually makes me feel better because it reminds me, okay, it's not surprising that it didn't happen this one cycle. I know it's going
Hmm.
to take a little bit more to lay that groundwork. And then I think the other thing, and this is actually how I handle my business too, is I basically say you have two choices. You can act or not act. And what do you want to do in this moment? And even if everything I'm doing doesn't make enough progress or doesn't ultimately work, I would much rather know that I've acted, that I've spoken out, that I've said, done something on this issue, than sit back and go, well, I don't think it's going to do any difference anyway. The
Hmm.
more of us that speak out, the more of us that push, it makes a difference. I remember months after I ran for office and I was in like REI or something, and the kid at the counter was like, "Are you Meg Wheeler?" And I was always like, "Oh, I don't know, am I?" And he said, I just really want to thank you. I'm LGBTQ. I really appreciated that because I was running against who was not super friendly in that area. And I really appreciate that you spoke out on that. And it really made me feel, for the first time in my life, safe in my community.
Oh,
Those
amazing.
little things, yeah, like, and you don't have to run for office to hear that, by the way. I mean, I years ago with the Kavanaugh thing, years ago, I had put a sign in my yard, and a neighbor that I'd never met stopped by and said, "I just want to thank you for your sign. I am the survivor of, sexual assault, and this has been really hard, and knowing that, somebody is on my side makes me feel better." So it's like you see that validation and that progress and all this. There are so many of us out there fighting for the
Mhm.
same things, even when it feels like you're alone and it's not going anywhere. You are making a difference, and that if that inspires one more person to go out there and fight, I mean, that's a huge impact.
100%. I mean, you see that in every level of our existence, really, is the second that you're able to get vulnerable or stand up for what you believe in any space. Because I remember when I started Clobear as a mental health blog, I get
Mhm.
messages all the time of how me just talking into this empty internet of like nobody listening. I thought nobody was listening, but
Yeah,
I'd get
people
messages
are.
and, I wasn't getting a lot of messages or anything, but the ones that I'd get is like, "Wow, this does matter. This is important." And like, if it's impacting this one person, phew, I've done something. I feel
Exactly.
that. And I love that you mentioned that's specifically how you run your business too, because I remember the moment when I decided to quit my job, I was like, I can see myself dying and regretting the fact that I didn't try. And it's like,
Yeah.
I want to at least say I tried. And if I fail, at least I gave it a shot. So I like the parallels between the business and the politics. And I mean, I guess it really
Yeah.
applies in every aspect. So,
Yeah.
switching to your work
Mhm.
in your business, which I think is so
Yeah.
cool. I love that this is a firm that's focusing on taxes that also has, you have your core values on your
Mhm.
website talking
Yeah.
about diversity and inclusion and understanding the marginalized communities and the extra help that needs to be provided in these areas. What would you say are the biggest challenges you're facing in your goals to address those issues right now with the business?
That's a great question. You've rendered me speechless. That's rare. I think the biggest challenge really just is there's only one of me and we're a small team, and there are so many people who need this, who will benefit from this, and we can only do so much. And that actually, and even more than the politics stuff, is probably the only thing where I do sometimes feel a little defeated. Like I want to get to more people. I want to reach more people because the information, I mean, the information is sort of out there in a sense, but it's not out there in a way that is helpful, or as you said it, that really addresses the underlying issues that marginalized business owners specifically are facing. And it's just, we have been cut out of so many things for so long. I mean, even
Right.
our education, think about education. Most of us, if not all of us, probably did not have any kind of a home economics course. We're certainly not taught, finance or investing or anything like that in school. We're at such a disadvantage anyway when we enter adulthood. And so then it really comes down to, okay, well, if you came from a wealthy family, maybe you learned through that, or maybe you have people who are already in place to help with that, or you have the ability to go to college, get that education. But we're not starting on a level playing field here. And so I think that's
Right.
probably the most frustrating thing is we're just trying to do everything we can to bring everybody up to speed. And there are only so many hours in the day.
Right. What do you think are some of the like maybe top 3 things that need to happen to help get people up to speed, to help get us to the same starting line? And I know it's a lot, and I know these are really big questions,
I have a
but I
list.
just yeah, good. I was like, if anybody has a list, she has a list.
How much time do we have? Congress, are you listening? I'm going to sort of try to balance this with things that are immediate and probably more practical and things that are dreams. Access to
Mhm.
capital is by far the biggest challenge here. I haven't seen the numbers for 2022, but we know that women only get about 2 or 3% of venture capital funds. If the stats are even worse when we start talking about people of color, we know that the wage gap is just extreme. It's a snowball. If you are making less money, you have less to invest, you have less to start the business, you have less to put in
Yep.
retirement, and that is a generational snowball. If you can't afford to buy a house, you can't pass that house on to your children, and again, it's a generational snowball. So access to capital, access to loans, access to college fund, like all of this, and college funds in a way that is sustainable, not, not something that's going to put you into a hole for the rest of your life. I think that, and that's sort of, again, that's a big one. That's a dream. That's a hard one to do. There are great people out there who are starting to, whether it's VC funds, Arlen comes to mind, Black Woman has an incredible VC fund focused on business owners, marginalized business owners. It's Mainvest or Public, places that allow you at a very smaller dollar amount to invest into small businesses. I mean, we're starting to see more and more opportunities for that, but I think that's huge. I also think it's education. The
Mhm.
amount of business owners that come to us and they don't know any of this stuff because when were we taught this? We weren't taught about having an accounting system and how to manage the finances in your business. None of that. That's just not something we're taught. And again, I think people who have come from wealthier families, people who have come from, educational backgrounds have more access to that education than a lot of folks. And so that is one place where we are able to make progress. And again, making our education free has been really important to us for that reason. So those are probably that's my dream and my practical one that I can,
I
but I
love
have a list.
it.
I got a long list.
Oh, I mean, you have to, right? Because it's even when you're campaigning, you have to really narrow it down into what are the things that I am going to fight for? What's possible here? And that's always, I think, what's interesting with politics too, is that you're constantly looking at, okay, what is idealistic, but what is realistic here? And you kind of have to do that combination of both of like have the dream, but you also have to be
Yeah,
like, all right, what can we accomplish right now?
exactly.
No, it's such a big thing with the venture capital statistic. It's just wild. I mean, do you think there would ever be this is just me
Hmm.
pondering it. I wonder if, like, when I think about, I always immediately think, okay, well, what is the solution? How do we get more venture
Right,
capital for people
right.
of color, women in general? And
Hmm.
I don't know if without any kind of regulation of like this percent of venture
Yeah,
capital has to go to, D&I or whatever it is,
yeah,
some types of wow, I am
yeah,
losing my words. Some type of initiative, something along those lines.
yeah.
But I wonder if that would ever happen. But again, that's not really solution focused.
I mean, we have to go back to the source. And I
Yeah,
forget the number, but the people giving out the money are majority, like super majority white men. So it's not, I mean, yeah, we could put some affirmative action in place, but that doesn't really get to the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem
right.
is the people controlling the purse strings. And this isn't just in venture capital, we're still
It's
seeing this in
everything.
government. We're seeing it's everything, exactly, in banking, all
Mhm.
across the board. Yeah, we have made strides, but we're still nowhere near to where we need to be. So it's fighting to get those spaces to change over. Like I mentioned Arlen as an example, it's creating our own spaces so that we're not fighting for theirs. We're just saying, screw it, we're going over here. And I think as business owners, it's about being really mindful of where we're spending our money and who we're
Mhm.
following. I mean, there are a lot of people in the online space that I will not follow because they are not supporting economic equity. The actions they're taking are not advancing us towards that goal. And I will not give them a dime of my money. I don't care how big they are or how successful they are. You've got to be mindful of that. Yeah, there are going to be some times when, there's still a few things I need in my business that are controlled by a very small, group of people.
Right.
But every dollar I spend in my business, I'm thinking, is this the best way I can spend this dollar? Who am I investing into when I spend this dollar? And can I do better? And you should all be thinking about that. I mean, we'll go back to your question about how do we make small differences? How do we do this in an easy way?
Right.
That's a great one. This is not a business one, but it came up yesterday in a conversation. Well, because of course Prince Harry's book just came out, so everybody's talking about the audio book. That's why it came up, I'll be honest. Are you listening to it on Audible? Which is owned by Amazon, or are you listening to it? I forget what it's called. What is it called? There's another one. There's two others, Lib something and something. But there are two that are great. Full name drop there. Of course, I forget the names, but they're not owned by Amazon. They're small independent
Gotcha.
companies. So it's like even those decisions, and they're the same price, by the way. They're the same exact price. So why wouldn't you put your money into a small company that has values that align with yours instead of Amazon?
Right. And again, that's bringing it back to that micro level of like, what can I do with my dollars that are supporting the things, the changes I want to see. That's doable. That's something we can all do and focus on,
Exactly.
especially if it's the same price. So I love that. It's such big problems that we're facing, both
Mhm.
in politics and in money, which we know are joint and combined. So for you right now in your business, so you're essentially taking control of all tax keeping, all tax management, bookkeeping and things on your end. So I imagine you work with a lot of new business owners or business owners who are just getting things like legit and things along those lines. So for you, for somebody who's getting started, what are some of the biggest challenges you see new business owners facing, and what are your suggestions and solutions? Maybe like 3.
Yeah.
We're not gonna limit.
I don't get a list. I'm just kidding.
Oh my God, I've been asking you such big questions. And like, for everybody who is listening, I did not prepare Meg. I didn't like
No.
send her, here are all the questions. I was like, hey, we're just going to shoot the shit. I think you're really interesting. I think your background's really interesting. Let's talk about it. I want to pick your brain. And like with the podcast, I get to pick people's brains. So like, she's coming out with these answers from the heart. Like, it's not rehearsed or anything along those lines. And I want to say, thank you for letting me put you on the spot because I know these are really big questions.
Oh, no, it's hey, I'm a politician, remember? I'm used to
Oh,
it.
right. You're like, bring it on, Clo Bear.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Yeah, look, if you're just starting out your business, I think the biggest challenge is people either don't want to think about the money stuff yet, just because it feels too overwhelming and they're so focused on trying to get the business up and running, or they don't have a clue what to do with it. So, super simple. You've got to keep your money separate bank account, whether or not, I don't care if you have an LLC or not, separate bank account for your business. Keep your money separate. It'll be much easier to track. It'll be easier if you do end up getting audited, but it's a better practice in general. Get a business bank account. The second one is track that money. Get an accounting system. I love Wave Apps, waveapps.com. It's free. It's pretty easy to set up and use. You've got to have a system for tracking your money, even when there isn't any money, even when it feels like I'll do it later when I start making lots of money. Do it now when things are easy. Even if you're only spending money, you haven't brought in any revenue yet, you still want to be tracking those expenses because they can probably be deducted from your taxes. So I think just separating the money, tracking the money, and then not ignoring the money would be number
Mhm.
3. Setting, I like to do it twice a month, but setting kind of a regular money date to check in on your numbers. I know it's scary. I know nobody wants to look at it. All the stories we tell ourselves about, oh, I'm not making enough, I'm not good enough, I'm stressed. What does it mean? I promise you, if you ignore this stuff, it's going to get worse. It's
Mhm.
significantly better and less painful if you're continuously checking in to see what's going on. And it also gives you more time to figure out what to do about it.
And what numbers would you say specifically are the important ones to keep track of?
Yeah. So there's a quote actually, and I feel like it's, oh God, is it Jack Welch? Don't not some old white guy. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is life, or I forget what the last, but something like that. Those are really the 3 numbers that I think are important. Your revenues tell you how well you're bringing sales. But it's important
Mhm.
to see how those are changing and where the money is coming from. Your profits tell you how well you're doing overall. You've got the money
Mhm.
coming in, but are you overspending? Are your expenses out of line? And so your profit really tells you like how financially stable is the business going to be long term. And then your cash flow is, maybe it was like stability or something, I don't know, somebody can look up the quote, but your cash flow is life, because if you don't have
Mhm.
cash in your business to make payroll or pay your expenses or whatnot, the business isn't going to survive. So at the beginning, you really want to look at those 3 numbers: revenues, where are my sales coming from and what's happening with my sales; profits, how well am I managing the expenses in my business; and then cash, how am I doing with cash flow and how long can I sustain, if my revenues or my profits drop, because ultimately cash flow is I mean, however, 50-60% of businesses that fail, it's like 90% of the time it's because of cash flow issues. So I'd be looking at those
Wow.
3 numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. So for somebody who is getting started, they're quitting their job to do this full time, when they're preparing to enter into full-time
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, do you usually recommend like a year emergency fund, or is there some kind of a range you usually recommend folks look at?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I'm laughing because I entered entrepreneurship with, I don't know, maybe 2 months of severance, and that was about it. I
Woof,
think I took
brave.
I mean, I just couldn't imagine going to work for somebody else again. That's that I
Yeah.
hit, I was
Well,
at the end.
And you were a two-income household at the time, right?
I was a two-income household. Now, we couldn't completely survive on my husband's income. We did need my in you're absolutely right. That does change it. And that's why I would say I think it comes down to your specific situation, but also your personality. I have clients,
Mhm.
if they had a year emergency fund, they would not get their business off the ground. They would be like, "I got
Mm.
time. We're good." They
Chillin'. Yeah.
exactly. They need the, like, month or it's gonna blow up type thing. But I have other
Yeah.
clients who would not be okay with that pressure. They need that longer. So I think you have to know a little bit about yourself, but does also come down to your situation. If you have a spouse or a partner who, can float the household bills for a while, I think that certainly changes it. At the end of the day, though, I'm gonna say the thing that, like, financial people shouldn't say, not just about the money.
Yeah.
A lot of the folks who start their own businesses and find themselves in our community have left whatever they were doing because of mental health, emotional
Mm.
health issues, physical health issues. All of those things have a financial price, and you have to factor that into the equation. For me, a big part of why I left was like emotional and mental health, which was turning into physical health issues. And so it didn't matter that I didn't have 6 months or a year of an emergency fund. The cost of that job for me was too high, and I had to make
Right.
that decision. So there's just a lot of factors at play, and I know that's hard. It's hard when somebody gives you a really vague answer, but
Oh,
at
but
the end of the
that's
day, you just got to do it.
yes. Well, and that's the thing is, I know. My answer half of the time with people in the lazy community on Instagram, it's always, it depends.
Yeah.
There's never going to be a blanket answer. And if somebody's giving you a blanket answer that they say applies to everybody, that should be your first red flag. So I was just curious in your experience of what you had seen or what your general rule of thumb was. But trust me, I know that general rule of thumbs are not cut and dry in our space that we're working in. So,
Not for nothing. I'll just add to that. I cannot think of a single client that had a year of emergency savings when they quit.
right.
If you have it, great. If you can get there,
Mhm.
fabulous. Most of my people probably had a few months and they made it work because they believed in it, and the alternative going back wasn't an option for them. So I think if you're in that
Right.
boat, I think you'll figure it out.
Well, I love the behavioral aspect that you mentioned as well of like
Mhm.
somebody who has a year emergency fund. There are certain behaviors or certain personality types where it would just be like, cool, I'm on vacation for the next 3 months and I'll get this business off the ground. Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's like, you have to know yourself and you have to
Mhm.
know what behaviors and you have to know what drives you. Cause I don't know, I'm somewhere in the middle. Like I like the comfort of knowing that I'm secure and I would rather have closer, I think, 6 to 9 months personally, but I also am very motivated by fear. I was like, I don't know how else to say this. I am definitely motivated by fear, but at the same time, my
Yeah.
fear barometer is probably pretty low. So, oh man. Okay, I have two more questions for you. So, one is a fun one. My first question, and this is going to seem very random, but I think it's something that a lot of us overlook sometimes when trying to think about the world in a bigger way. Like, we
Mhm.
have talked about the patriarchy, we have talked about marginalized communities, we have talked about how there are unfair systems in place in this country.
Mhm.
Somebody who is listening who is like, what? What do you mean? Like, what are those systems? How, like, what is the patriarchy? Like, how, because, it wasn't that long ago when I was completely ignorant to this sort of thing. I had to
Yeah.
do a lot of reading, a lot of educating myself, and like, I am still learning. What were
Mhm.
some, or what are some of the resources you recommend for somebody who is listening and is like, this is
Mm.
all news to me? Like, do you have favorite books? Where did you start to learn? Just build that awareness.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I am such a book nerd, and I'm embarrassed that there's not a title popping into my mind right now, and I think it's because there's so many that I love that
So
I'm
many.
struggling to land on one. So here's what I would say, and again, going back to your point about how this stuff can be so overwhelming, there's so many issues. I would pick anything in your life, whether it's your house or your education or your job or your healthcare, like any of the big things of your life, I would, pick one. It doesn't matter which one you pick. And I would go to your library. We still have libraries. We should be supporting them, or go online, go, wherever. And I would ask and say, you can Google like housing equity, healthcare equity, whatever. And you'll get a great list if it's, a book, a podcast, a movie, a show, depending on kind of what your your personal preferences, and start to dig into that one thing. In fact, there's a book, and I can't remember the name, but speaking of housing, it talks a lot about how housing from the beginning, certainly has been set up for white people, and how, and you have to remember with everything, that decision that was made many years ago to not give mortgages to people of color, to not give mortgages to single women, it again, it snowballs. I said this before, but it all compounds, and not in the good way. This is not the compounding we
Right.
like. It's creating this, because think about, you know, if my family bought a house in the early 1900s and that passed on and on, that's wealth that's building, that's appreciating, and all of
Right.
that. If somebody else's family didn't do that, and this is the first generation that can buy a house, that's a huge gap that they're starting their wealth building from when my family has started their wealth building. So I think you pick any issue that feels like even, or anything that feels even remotely interesting to you, and you'll find a plethora of resources on
Mhm.
it. I think starting with the history is really important, because there's so much going on today that exists because of what happened 100 years ago, hundreds of years ago, whatever it may be. Criminal justice is another, and policing and the prison, system is another one that I can think of that kind of has ties that go really far back. And just start being open to the fact that the
Mhm.
way we thought the world worked is not the way the world works. I mean, I am
That's
white.
huge.
So, yeah, so I grew up, you know, thinking the world worked a certain way. And lo and behold, not quite right. And you have to really be willing to be uncomfortable. This is
Mhm.
not a personal attack against you. It's not a personal attack against your family. It is just a truth about the condition of this world. And if we want to truly be change makers, we have to be willing to accept our role in this inequitable society that we live in.
Yeah, no, I think that's massive of knowing taking that moment to realize you really don't know
Mhm.
much, especially if you never ventured outside of what you were taught in school. Because what we were
Yeah.
taught in school is such a small portion that is written from the victor's standpoint. And to understand that is by design, it's a really
Mhm.
hard thing to completely unwind and realize everything you think you only know
Yeah.
one very small side of it,
Yeah.
and to humble yourself and keep learning and know you're going to make mistakes as well. I've made mistakes, we've all made mistakes in our journey, but it's owning
Mhm.
that and deciding to do better for sure.
100%.
Love it. All right, I got one more question for you. It's just a fun one, but before
I was
I
gonna
do,
say, did you
let's
call the other one a fun one? I mean, it was fun for me, but
it's like it's a lighthearted, it's not deep into the issues of our world. Like, I mean, it is fun too. But before I get to that question though, promote yourself. Tell us
sure.
what resources are available. We will put links in the show notes.
Love it. So again, you can find me at megkwheeler.com. Our handles are all Meg K Wheeler. We are actually at the very beginning of a brand shift, rolling out and I wish I could tell you the name, but I'm literally about to find out from the lawyer in like an hour that we can use it. So I can't tell you yet, but maybe by then.
Nice. Okay.
But we are basically rolling out our entire educational platform for financial education and empowerment. So, but megkwheeler.com will continue to work. So you can always find us there. We are enrolling for tax clients now. So if anybody's looking for that, certainly you can go to our website and check that out. But yeah, please come visit. The Biz Money Library is free. Again, there's a link to it on our website. All you have to do is create a login, and please enjoy the resources. Whether or not you become a paid client, they are there for that purpose.
Amazing. Well, thank you for all of the work that you're doing. It's incredibly important. Now on to the fun question. What's your
Okay.
very first money memory?
Whew, I feel like I think I shared one in the group, but now I'm forgetting what it was.
I
So,
think you did too.
um,
I can't remember it. So, for side note for everybody, Meg is in my lazy investors community. So when she joined, I was so pleasantly surprised. I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
hey!"
It's always good to, I don't know that much about investing. So, I mean, I know a little bit. I'm investing a little bit, but I've loved your resources. So, highly recommend. I think this is the one I shared in the community. So, I remember when I was a little kid, my mom, single mom, and we were fine. Like, we had food, we had a house, we were fine, but, we weren't wealthy by any means. And I remember every Christmas she would say, this Christmas is going to be, it's going to be smaller this year. You got to we got to kind of prepare ourselves for that. And then it never failed. Every Christmas was great. And I remember kind of looking back and thinking, is she lying? Like, what's going on? And I suspect in reality, I have to actually ask her, but I suspect in reality, what was happening was my grandparents were probably chipping in, or, she was going into debt or something. So that's my first money memory. And there's a lot there that we could unpack. So,
Yeah. What do you think in the biggest way? Like, what do you
mm,
think how do you think that impacted you? I'm sure it impacted you in a lot of small ways, but if you were like,
yeah,
I know for sure it impacted me in this way in relation to my money or
yeah.
mindset, what would you say that is?
Yeah, I can tell you. So it's part good and part bad. I think on the bad side, it taught me that stuff will always show up. Whatever I need will
Mm,
always be there. So I didn't, it sort of didn't teach me the reality that I kind of wish it would sometimes. But I think on the flip side, on the good side, it gives me that optimism so that even when I hit really tough, and I have had a lot of really tough money moments in my life, I don't completely get the wind sucked out of me. I'm like, okay, somehow this is going to work itself out. Like,
right.
I'm going to have to figure it out, but somehow it's going to work itself out. It's going to be okay. There will be presents under the tree. Like, we're going to get there. So I think that optimism, I read somewhere that the best entrepreneurs are the ones who are just like hopelessly optimistic. And I think that's so true. Like, you have to have almost like a delusional sense of belief in yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because otherwise you'll hit a hard patch and go, "Forget it, I'm out." So
100%. One of the books that I read that actually caused me to even start Clobert when it was a mental health blog was a book called You're a Badass by Jen
mhm.
Sincero. I don't know if you've read that one,
Oh, yeah.
but I love part of it where it talks about we're all delusional. Like, whether we're delusional in a positive way or a negative way, we're all delusional. Whether you think you're the shittiest human being who has ever walked this
Yeah,
earth or whether you
yeah,
think you're the best human being that was ever born, we're all delusional. You might as well pick the delusion that is helpful. And it's like, it's more
100%.
helpful believing in yourself. It's such a much more pleasant, and I struggle with this, but it's a much more pleasant existence thinking like, yeah, I can do anything I put my mind
Mhm.
to rather than believing I can do nothing I put my mind to, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got
No,
this.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. My mom, and for the record, my mom has also said that I think for every single Christmas we've ever had, she'd be like, we're cutting back this year. And like sometimes she would, but most of the time it's like, did you really cut back?
Yeah, maybe it's a
But
parent thing. Is there, like, a memo they send around?
right. I wonder if they're just like lowering our expectations so that it's like, this is great. I have no idea. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on. And I really appreciate your willingness to handle my questions with such candor and grace. I was like, I probably should send you questions beforehand, but I really like that we were able to kind of just roll with it. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast, and I'm just happy to be here.
Sure. And we'll leave links to all of the things that you're doing down in the show notes. Again, thank you for the amazing work that you're doing. That was a lot that we covered. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I know I kind of jumped around, but Meg was so good at just taking those really hard questions and giving us real actionable advice, and her perspective on things with all the work that she's doing is just incredible, and I feel really lucky that she was able to come onto this podcast. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't jump around too much. If I did, if you're like, Chloe, you need to be more organized, you just let me know. Send me a DM, say, hey, I have some suggestions for how you can better organize your interviews. But anyway, I did want to circle back. It sounds so corporate. I wanted to circle back on the recommendations for books and things because I often forget that just a few years ago, like back in 2017, I was to a lot of the things that we discussed today on the podcast about marginalized communities, the systems that are in place in our country that prevent people from being able to build wealth or having access to capital or having access to education, or even just as she was mentioning, the ability to buy houses and things along those lines. I remember not knowing anything about that stuff and thinking that I knew how the world worked. And I had to open myself up to realize I don't understand how the world works and I have a lot to learn in order for me to humble myself and decide I really need to educate myself. And so I wanted to follow up with some of the books that I actually read, and they're different topics. So obviously, and I agree with what Meg said, you have to start learning in a way that interests you. And so for me, the way that I started learning about the patriarchy and about white supremacy and about all of these systems in our country was through things that interest me first. And so I actually started with body image. I struggled for most of my life with eating disorders. And after trying everything to get rid of my binge eating disorder and dealing with all the self hatred I had for not fitting into the typical standard of beauty, I started following body positive folks on Instagram, and that led me to read books on body positivity and understanding the beauty standards that are in this country and how those beauty standards were imposed by white men in the patriarchy. Now, I'm literally pulling up Amazon because I want to make sure I get this right. Yes. Okay. So, one of the very first books that I read about body positivity was The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf. So, again, that's The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf. That really helped me stop hating myself, but also I absolutely loved both books by Jess Baker. So, Jess Baker was probably the first body positive book I ever read. And it was called Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls, A Handbook for Unapologetic Living. And it really helped me stop hating myself and stop expecting myself to be something else and to understand that all these feelings and thoughts that I had about myself and my body were really not necessarily my fault. It was the diet culture, the diet industry that wants us to hate ourselves so that they can sell us the solution. That book changed my life and changed my perspective on myself, honestly. So that was Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls by Jess Baker. She also has a book called Land Whale, which was also fantastic, but the one I will recommend again and again is her first book, Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls. That changed my life. So that was how I first entered into this idea or belief or understanding of the patriarchy. And from there, it kind of continued through some body image things to and learning about diet culture and understanding that I didn't have to buy into diet culture. And eventually when everything happened with George Floyd, I got into a book club that was dedicated to learning about racial inequities in our country and the racial systemic oppression in this country because I knew literally nothing. All I knew is that what happened with George Floyd broke my heart. And I realized that I was living a very different life, a very privileged life of not being able to understand what's going on for other people in marginalized communities. And I needed to learn so that I could be a better ally. And so I started with, gosh, we read so many books on the topic, but a few that stand out is How to Talk About Race, is I believe the title. Let me pull that up so I can give you How to Talk About Race. This one's really great. Oh, so it's called So You Want to Talk About Race. This is helpful in just having those conversations. And that's by Ijeoma Oluo. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right, but Oluo. You should be able to find it just by searching for So You Want to Talk About Race. Fantastic. Understanding how to talk about race and what's okay, what's not okay. The New Jim Crow was another one talking about incarceration, specifically of Black men and how the war on drugs impacted and was this racist initiative that was led by our country. Then on top of it, one of the most impactful books that really helped me understand was called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibrahim Kendi. Stamped from the Beginning. It's basically a textbook, but I learned so much from that one book. Like if you were going to read one book just to understand the history of the oppression of Black people in this country, Stamped from the Beginning. You have to read it. It is life changing in that it just peels back the curtains for folks like me, white privileged folks like me, to understand how the world actually worked other than what we were told in our textbooks. So, highly recommend those books. Those are some great things to get you started if that's particularly something that interests you. The books that are on my list to read next are The Color of Money as well. What was the other one? The Color of Money, and then the other one was The Color of Law. So those are on my list next, but those are some heavy books for sure, heavy books to get you started, but that stamp from the beginning just completely opened my eyes to a lot of things that were going on in this country that I had no idea and that are still going on in our country. So yeah, hope that helps. If you guys read any of those or have any further recommendations, feel free to DM me on Instagram. You guys know I'm active there. But yeah, heavy episode, but an important episode. And I hope you learned something. I hope that if you're feeling defensive or feeling like this is BS, that you open your mind to at least understanding more and educating yourself. I've been there and I'm really glad that I learned more. So nothing hurts by educating yourself, right? So that you can have an informed opinion on it. All right, that's all I got for you guys today. Since we were talking about finances, please remember that everything on this show is intended for opinion and entertainment only. We are not financial advisors. We're not advising you on what to do with your finances, just educating you. If you want to see more about our terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And if you've listened to this episode and you're like, cool, I love all these ideas for starting a business, but also I still need to figure out my own personal finances, head down into the show notes. We've got a free Get Your Money Right guide over at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. Grab that. And I've got a link to my free investing class down there as well. So that's all we got today. If you stayed this far and you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.